Be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, thank you for being here. Please tell the audience who is April. Tell us a bit about your professional experience. Where were you born? What did you study? And how did you discover your passion? Right? What's your story?
Sounds great. Yeah. So I was born in California and in Palo Alto, but when I was two, we moved to Texas. So I actually grew up in Texas and then I came back out to California. I studied computer science at a school called Pomona College in Southern California, which interestingly is a liberal arts school, but I studied computer science. So I got a good mix. And I mentioned that because clearly it plays into where I ended up. And then I worked in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, for about 10 years at a bunch of different companies, mostly startups, a few couple larger companies, but mostly startups. Um, I worked in health tech and education tech and user research, bioinformatics, kind of all over. Job hopped a lot because I was looking for, what I enjoyed and what I found meaningful. And, at all of these places, I would enjoy parts of it, but there were definitely some problems that I saw in the tech industry in terms of burnout was happening a lot. People seemed to be working way too hard, burning out. I saw a lot of conflict on teams and people just not able to communicate effectively and just it kept butting heads. And so I saw that happen a lot. And then, I started to think about what we were building in the world with technology and whether it was helping or hurting. And sometimes it seemed like it was helping, but sometimes it seemed like we were just creating addictive products or we were creating things that were negatively impacting society. And so I thought, I got to a point of frustration where I was just like, I keep jumping around trying to find the right fit, but none of this is working. So I'm just going to start my own company. And so that's how I ended up starting Compassionate Coding with the hope of bringing more compassion, emotional intelligence, the human side to technology in at every level. And so that's what I do now, and I've been doing that for 8 years now.
Nice, nice. The word compassionate. It has a lot of meaning, right? How would you define it?
Yeah, so I like to look at compassion as you understand and see what somebody's going through and you want to help them and do something about it. So empathy I think is just that first piece of kind of understanding what somebody's going through, what they're feeling, but compassion kind of takes a more active approach. You actually want to do something to help alleviate suffering. So if you see someone hurting, you want to do something to help them. And so compassion includes that motivation to actually take action. And so that's how I look at it. I got that from research, social science research on this from UC Berkeley. That's they define it as seeing, understanding suffering, and then a desire to alleviate that suffering.
Great. Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. It sounds really good. Um, have you seen across time that we're getting better or that we're getting worse at this?
That's I thankfully I absolutely see improvement. So when I
Awesome.
started my company 8 years ago, I'm coming up on 8 years this May, which is wild to me because it's just so much time has passed. But yeah, when I started it, definitely I got a lot of pushback. Especially online, a lot of hate for what I was doing, like, oh, soft stuff and all of that. Oh, it sounds like a girly thing, just, all manner of just really kind of negative impact. People said, oh, you're never going to make money doing this. Like, do we even need this? Blah, blah, blah. But I was persistent. And that's one of my things is I'm a little bit stubborn, a little bit persistent. So I was like, no, there's something here. And so I believed enough in myself. And I had a few supporters. My mom was always on my side for one. She was always like, keep at it, keep at it. So I'm grateful to her. But yeah, and then I put it out there, and I saw since then things have changed so much. I mean, I think as society in general, we've opened up this conversation about mental health and about our impact on society. That the movie, Social Network or whatever came out, and or not the Social Network, the one about like how the impact of Facebook, I forget what it's called, but yeah, so
Mhm.
the Social Dilemma, that's what it's called.
Mm.
um and I think we've seen a lot of different awareness in this area, so I do think we're having the conversation, definitely see improvements, always more work to do. And now sometimes I think in some ways we've gone too far in the sense of people are like walking on eggshells and afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so I think that that's not really compassionate either, because then it's like we're not connecting because we're like, oh no, I'm going to say the wrong word and then I'm going to be canceled and all of that. And so I'm like, I think we need to find a middle ground where it's like we can have these conversations and we're all human and that sort of thing, and not like very rigid. And so that's the area where I think we especially need improvement is polarization is still a big problem, partly because of the technology makes it so, because it's all about engagement and extreme emotions. And so I think one thing I've been working on more myself is bridge building. So, not having a very like extreme response to things, but being like, oh, interesting that you see it that way, and let's see how we can find some common ground. And that, so I will say that's one change I've made, just as I've seen like the improvement in the industry happen.
Got you. Thank you for sharing. So I think that your topic and what you are preaching um, has to do a lot with what I am doing about agile. I
Mm.
think that this agile concept has to do. It's very together with having compassion for others, and of course, in the tech world, I can see how in certain industries and certain places in the planet we are more advanced in agile. Would you Have you seen this with this need for compassion coding in certain industries or in certain parts of the world that need it most more? Sorry.
That's an interesting question, and I love that you made the connection to Agile, because I absolutely see that connection as well. Like, I think the Agile manifesto and the Agile values and everything are have this like through line of emotional intelligence, of caring about humans, like caring about the
Hmm.
customer, all of that. So I definitely see the connection you're talking about. I agree. It's very, very well aligned. I think the reason I saw a need for something new was partly because I think with Agile, you can deliver value, quote unquote, but you might be like still hurting like humanity. You know what I mean? So you could in theory deliver value to the company, but like being kind of terrible. Or sometimes I see with some agile people, they miss the part about people over process, and they get so into the process. And then it's
Hmm.
like, and so I think part of compassion is like bringing a little more of the humanity into it. So I see agile as a good step, and then I see, but yeah, but to your question about different parts of the world. So with compassionate coding, I actually speak at conferences all over the world, and work with companies all over the world. And I've seen that everywhere can benefit from uh, a connection to humanity, from compassion, from agile, from all of these ideas. I think that different societies, different cultures have different things built into them that make it more or less accessible, like to begin with. So, for instance, in some cultures, like emotional expression is discouraged, right? So if I'm talking about connecting emotionally, there's some resistance to that. And I try to be mindful of that, like not coming in as the American being like, this is how you need to do it. Nobody wants that. So I try to be empathetic as well, and of different cultures. But yeah, I mean, I think one thing I found is like in Scandinavian countries, for instance, the work seems to really resonate there. And I think, they do have kind of a culture of caring about the community. And I wonder if that's partly why it resonates well, is because they kind of already have that in the culture. And so then when I'm speaking to that, it kind of resonates. But then they still have not always applied it in the workplace, like in connecting emotionally. So I think that there's still like progress to be made there, change to be made there. So yeah, so I think you're spot on there. I'm curious if what you've seen in terms of different cultures or different places.
Yeah, well, I think that United States is doing a good job because most of the clients, I work for a consulting company, and most of our clients are in United States because they are trying to be agile, right? In terms of just getting better at empowering teams and delivering more value. I don't see that happening in Latin America that much, right? They are starting, but it takes us, like, for example, if in the United States you have a song that is very good, it will take probably 6 months or 1 year or something to come to Mexico. So I think it will come eventually, right? The need for to be more agile and to take more into consideration the personal or the human side of coding and developing great tech products. So I think we are almost there, but it's flowing very slow, right? And I think that aligned with the United States, I can see also this happening in Europe and the eastern part of the planet. But yeah, for Latam, it's going slow, right? That's what I can share. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I did speak at a coding boot camp, like virtually, in Mexico City. I think it was a MOOC Tech, I think was the name of it. And yeah, and it seemed to resonate. But yeah, I can see that what you're talking about is that maybe it's like it's a gradual, right? The shift is a little gradual. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that at some point companies are starting to save some budget for this, right? Because they haven't before. They don't see this as an inversion, more than like I'm just throwing my money. I don't know how will this, and this is kind of a good topic also for you and me. I think it's a challenge, not a good topic. The challenge to how do we prove that these trainings and these agile and these compassion will, reflect in return of investment, right? How do we make that line? Have you experienced this challenge?
Yeah, see what you mean there. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's almost like a lot of the things that are most important in life and definitely in the workplace, but like in life in general, you can't really measure. And like the
Hmm.
problem is that like of course these companies want to affect the bottom line. So I want to see I want to see how we improved profit because of this training like very clearly, right? And of course, once you do like learn, kind of compassion and a holistic way of looking at humans and everything like that, you realize that like that's such a narrow view, but you kind of have to meet people where they are, right? So I will say a few things on that. One is it is a challenge, but I will say I try to avoid it by not trying to do a hard sell to people. So I try not to like sell people on compassion, so to speak. I think of it more of putting out like content, putting out like a message into the world and seeing who it does resonate with. And so far that's worked well. The people who it resonates with, they reach out to me and they ask for a training. And so I don't have to be like, here's why you need this. And then, because I don't like the energy of that. I just don't like the way that feels. But that said, the one thing that's encouraging is there are a ton of efforts to do research to show the impact of this. So a book that I really like is called Awakening Compassion at Work by Monica
Hmm.
Warline and Jane Dutton. And they've done a ton of research on businesses that apply a compassionate approach and show like how it improves customer retention, employee retention, improves like the bottom line, and shows like research on that. I think, Pluralsight has the Developer Success Lab where they've been doing research on culture issues and how it impacts the bottom line. So there are a lot of efforts, I think, to do research to show how important these things are. I think that's the thing. I look at the qualitative a lot. So like after I do a training with companies, they'll reach out to me and say like, oh, we're still talking about this, like we use this today, we use this technique today, and so for me, like, or when someone says like this, like literally like after my one of my recent trainings, somebody wrote and said this issue has been bothering me for years and like you helped me work through it, and I was like, oh, like, you know what I mean? So it's like those things for me are like that's the power, right? It's like a lot of times, so I sort of see it as planting seeds of compassion and then you just never know. So it affects, it has all these like ripple effects like down the line. And so, so I know I don't have a satisfying answer to that because I think that trying to put a number on these things is part of the problem, right? And so I think even part of the message I try to convey with people is that it's not always about like trying to measure. Like I think we kind of overdo it a bit on that. And again, that's the analytical side. And so part of the work I do is trying to balance that out with both, right? And looking at the qualitative side. And so, yeah, that's kind of my answer to that.
Yeah, that's great. I can still think of some KPIs that should improve, maybe attrition, or there should
Yeah,
be something like there
sure.
there, there must be, right, some link. But yeah, in case you want numbers. But yeah, I understand the message. That's good. Okay. April, were there some examples that you might want to share with the audience around um, at what point, like you said, this is not good. I'm not in a good place. I need to start doing this. Like maybe there are some persons looking at this that are in a place where there's no compassion and they do not realize it, right? So how did you come up with this idea? Like, I cannot take this anymore. Let's do this, right?
Yeah, no, that's the way you described it is exactly how it happened. So there were a few like signposts kind of along the way that let me know. One thing I think that everyone will identify with that's listening to this is job interviews. I feel like in tech are particularly not compassionate. And so, I had my fresh computer science degree in my hand and I went out in the world trying to get a job, right? And these job interviews were just like, I was actually good at taking tests. Like I was like straight A student. Like I was a good student, and these interviews though were nothing like that because it wasn't clear, like there wasn't like a clear thing to study and then like you do the test and then you do well. It was like it was felt like combat. Like it felt like they were coming at you really just like aggressively with these questions, asking you trivia questions, putting you on the spot to do whiteboard things, and then like it was just very much so there's very not compassionate. I think you were setting people up to fail versus trying to find what value these people can bring to the table. So job interviews were kind of one of my early insights into something's a little off here. Then of course, there were little things along the way that I noticed where um I don't dwell on this because then people, whatever. But being a woman in tech, like there aren't that many, and so you do notice things. People do like say inappropriate things. People do say like they can be a little bit more condescending. They do underestimate you. Like that does happen. Okay, like I don't like to, like I said, dwell on it too much. But there is an aspect of that, and that did happen sometimes in the companies that I was in. And then, especially, I will say at the last company I was at, which where is where I hit my breaking point. I was hired and onto a 40-person engineering team, and I was the only woman when I joined on the engineering team of 40. And so, I was up to the challenge because I was kind of used to that. I was often the only girl in my classes in school or whatever, so it wasn't unusual to me. But because of that, I always see it as my job to make it better for the women who come after me. So I was trying to improve the culture and try to make it more welcoming and say, hey, things like, we shouldn't say, "Oh, let's hire a good iOS guy," right? Because then we're setting up in our head that we wanna hire a guy. So
Mhm.
I would give them little suggestions, and then I got the feedback that people were afraid of me, which is kinda funny because, like, look at me, what's there to be afraid of? But I thought that was interesting, and so it was that was the last straw for me, and I was just like, I was trying to improve things and I did get them to hire some women earlier on, but I was just like, "Ugh, I can't do this anymore." And that was sort of the final breaking point for me. But there were other things too, like, prior to that, I was working in a company that was trying to do, good stuff, like, in the health tech space, but again, because they were, like, venture backed, trying to improve trying to appease the investors, they were gonna use the data that we had gathered and try to in weird ways that didn't seem quite ethical, and I was like, "I don't wanna be part of this," like, to sell products or whatever, which is not why I got on board, and so that was another thing where it was like, clearly compassion wasn't in play there, and so that those little signs, I think when you don't feel valued as a human being too, when you're in a company, is like a big thing to look for. And when you feel like you have to shut off parts of yourself. So I feel like early on in my career, I tried to fit in with this like hyper masculine, like, look how impressive I am, and arrogant kind of like programmer, like whatever, technologist. And I I realized that that was part of why I was burning out because I was trying to fit in and trying to be someone that I'm not because I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be like the jerk programmer, as I sometimes call myself jokingly, but I want to be compassionate. And I think that we should make space for that. And so I think when people are feeling that, there's something very empowering, I will say, about about branching out and starting your own thing. It's challenging, but it feels very empowered. I feel like I get to make choices about how I, plan my days, about what I do, what clients I work with. If I get a bad feeling from a client or I don't feel like they're going to treat me respectfully, like I don't have to work with them, and so I think that to anyone who's feeling that way, I think you may be able to find a place where you fit in, but also I wouldn't knock, starting your own thing. Like I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, I hear you. Do you think that this is that there's more need for this compassion coding mindset for in the female side in tech or in the men's side in tech? And I'm asking you, it might be very obvious, but I'm asking you because, for example, in Mexico, everyone thinks that we are I don't know how to say it in English, machista, país machista, like where men are the ones that
Hmm.
tell the shots and are the ones that say things in house. And this is totally wrong. I mean, every single of my friends and everyone that I know of at this in my age, around from, I don't know, 25, 30 to 45, 50, the girls are the ones in charge of the houses and they are telling us what to do, and we're taking care of kids. And if you're not in Mexico, you will think that it's a place where men are very, very strong, and I will do whatever I want, and it's not like that, right? So how have you, in your experience with the companies, how have you seen this? Is it as a female a thing, or a masculine thing?
I'm glad you asked about that because, like, I'm happy to talk about this, and I don't think we talk about it enough because people get kind of nervous to talk about it because
Yeah.
it's like, and so, but no, I mean, there's clearly something. There's definitely the masculine and feminine, like and it can show up differently in women and men, right? Like women can have more masculine traits, men can have more feminine traits, whatever. So it's not such a clear, sharp line between them. But I
Hmm.
definitely feel like in tech, we really value masculine traits. So we value
Hmm.
like drive and ambition and like being, quote unquote logical and like all these hard things. And I think the feminine is not as valued. And again, that can show up in men or women, but the feminine energy, like this nurturing, like being collaborative, like all these things that we actually need are not as valued. And so I think in tech, like the work that I do is I'm trying to balance that out because I don't think of course we still need the masculine side. I just think that we don't need just the masculine side. And so I think we need a mix. We need to value what both sides can bring to the table. And so then we both get to, because that's like the dance. I mean, that's like the dance of humanity. I mean, this is how, this is what creates new life. This is what, you know what I mean? Like this is the issue is it's not about one over the other. And so, I think maybe what the patriarchy people talk about that here, like where it's like men are in control, kind of is the word we use for that. And I think what that really means is just that we value the masculine more because I don't think we're stuck like we were, whatever in the 1950s where men are calling all the shots. I just think we still value masculine traits more. And so I think that's what we see showing up in tech and just more generally. But I think you're also right that there's that power that you mentioned that women have in Mexico. That's interesting to hear because I do think that there's a maybe you could even call it like a soft power that women have, which is that we can negotiate using our empathy and using those things, and so it can actually we have power in that sense too. Like maybe physically on average we may not be as powerful, right, like in that sense, but like I do think we have a lot of power as well. So like I definitely don't view myself or women as victims at all. I think that we're very much like strong. I think like compassion, I don't view as a weakness, right? Like that's a perfect example of something that's traditionally been seen as a feminine trait, like being compassionate. But I think that it's actually really powerful. It's kind of like, a mama bear that protects her cubs. Like we have, that's compassion, right? So compassion is not just the soft, like, oh, I'm being nice and I don't want to offend people. Compassion is sometimes the people like speaking up and being assertive and saying, hey, no, we're not going to put up with XYZ. That's compassion too. And so that's something I try to emphasize in my work is that compassion is very powerful, and it's for women and men, right? Because men also that take on that protector role or whatever, they're also showing compassion, or when they um whatever, like when they're in the workplace and collaborating and being effective, like that's also compassion, and it's open to all people.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I totally agree that some people get nervous about this. So this is a safe place. I don't really care if someone doesn't like our opinions. I mean, we can just give them, and if someone agrees. So sometime like a couple of years ago, maybe 1 year ago, I was explaining the perfect Scrum Master, right? And in my video, I was saying at the end, I said, well, I think that girls do a better job at scrum mastering because of this compassion that they naturally have. They are a little more organized that we are, right, that men are, and they have this charisma that can help a lot. And I got immediate hate, right? Like from men,
Yeah.
like, do you think girls are better scrum masters? And I was like, well, that's my opinion. I mean,
No,
right?
I know, I hear what you're saying. It's because people there is a resistance to like it's funny that you said it was men who actually got offended because I was thinking you would
Yeah,
have I was thinking women might be because even women can get offended by that because they think they're being stereotyped, which I understand. Nobody wants to be stereotyped, and but I know when you say that you're speaking in terms of averages, right? In terms of the average
yeah.
woman probably is more, compassionate than the average man. I mean, I think it's better to be realistic about these things, and I think because I think too often we try to act like men and women are exactly the same, and it's just not true. I'm sorry, it's not. And then, like, and so like and again, individuals it's a different story. Like yes, we have different mixes of traits, but I think for the tech industry, if we really want to make it more inclusive to women, we have to be honest about the fact that we may need to adjust some of the culture to make sure that we're valuing the traits that women are bringing to the table, and like on average like you talked about. So yeah, but that is interesting. So we may get hate on this video then, and whatever, bring it on, people. I'm sorry, like I'm here for it, ready for it.
Yeah, me too. Bring it on. So no worries. Okay. April, how could you walk us through a typical compassionate coding training session? How is the steps, or what's the big message or the highlights?
Sure, yeah. So companies reach out to me, as I mentioned. So what I like about that is that they have a need for it somehow. So they realize already like they could use some compassion, and so then I view it as my job to figure out what that team can most benefit from. So rather than kind of having a set training that I just do at every company, like I would get bored with that, and I feel like they would get bored with that because they would know that I'm just repeating the same thing over and over again. So for me, what's fun is doing an interview with people on the team to figure out, like, it's almost like a user interview that you might do to figure out what to build for a product. But I'm trying to figure out like what's going on in this team culturally, communication wise, etc. That and to figure out what to put in the training. So that's the first part is I do interviews with like 2 or 3 people on the team and like the leaders as well, and to kind of understand that. And then, based on that, I create, a curriculum and it's usually most common way I work with companies is like a 4-hour training, and it's sometimes like a half day, and it's sometimes split over 2 days, if it's especially if it's on Zoom, because 4 hour Zoom is just too much for anyone. But
Mhm.
like 2 hours one day, 2 hours the next day, that's pretty good. And so, or before or after lunch if needed. I prefer to do them in person, to be honest, because I think when you're talking emotional intelligence, like I like looking people in the eye. I do it virtually, of course, but I'm just saying I kind of prefer to do it in person. But anyway, so we'll start off with self-compassion and and talking about the aspects of understanding our own emotions and our own like communication style and basically our side of the street, understanding all that. And that's where we start. So we might work through incidents where we've, lost control over our emotions, or we've had, incidents, and kind of doing some introspection. So we start with that side. And then we talk about how to apply empathy, how to apply communication frameworks in order to communicate more effectively with your teammates. And that's what we do. Then second is kind of the communication side. And so I'm inspired a lot by nonviolent communication, but it's mixed in with a bunch of other stuff, and drawing from emotional intelligence research and organizational psychology and all of that. But so giving them tools in order to communicate. So we do practice with that. So I'll put people in breakout rooms or group exercises where they get to practice giving and receiving feedback, which comes in handy. Code reviews, design reviews, one-on-ones, performance reviews. Giving and receiving feedback is like such an important skill, and it's I think people need more help with that. We'll touch on things like listening skills because, again, I don't think that gets enough attention. And then I always like to end with an action plan. So, how people can apply this going forward. Because another thing I remember is when I was just an individual contributor, software engineer, or even leading teams, what I noticed was that we could have a training and then it'd be really nice and everyone's all jazzed up, but then the next day they just forget it and they move on and they go back to what they were doing. And so I want like when we do a compassionate coding training, like I want it to leave a mark with people and I want them to be inspired to continue applying this going forward. And so we end with an action plan of how are you going to apply this going forward? Like exactly what are you going to do? And so I think that that's kind of sets it apart as well as and I usually do follow-ups with the team where down the line, like a few months from now, or a few, like 3 months, 6 months, etc., we'll check in with them and sort of do. I encourage them to do a personal retrospective. So like the agile retrospective, where you
Mhm.
look back at what went well, what you could do differently. I try to get them to do that on a personal level. Like, here's what I said I was going to accomplish in terms of emotional intelligence and what I plan to do, and then here's what I've done well with on that. Here's where I can still improve, and so that's kind of we do these little check-ins, and so that's kind of what it looks like. And again, it varies a bit based on the team, but that's it. Kind of, and then I sometimes do shorter trainings for again, I'm pretty adaptable with it, so it's kind of a more like customized approach, I think, than some of the typical corporate training out there.
Awesome. Sounds really interesting. What are some of the, well, let me explain. If I come back to the company and I say, hey, April is going to come here and she's going to give us an awesome emotional intelligence chat and conversation or training. I know that everyone in the Agilist world, like I have like 21 direct reports, and I'm sure that my team will be super happy, right? They will be like participating because they are Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. But if I do the same with 20 developers and QAs, I can see their faces saying, emotional intelligence? I mean, I like my computer because of the nature of the work, right? They like their computer, they like coding, they like to be focused, and that's it. What challenges have you faced with the nature of these positions, right? The tech world.
Yeah, what a great question. Okay, so my background is in software engineering, and I will say that I used to be one of those people who would have rolled my eyes at a training like this. And so I mention that because I think that that's like the secret of how I'm able to connect with people like that, because they look at like, oh, she's actually a software engineer. She's not like, she's
That'll
not
be really helpful.
yeah, she's not in HR. She's not, which again, nothing against human resources, nothing against people
Mhm.
ops, nothing against agile scrum, all of that. But I know the
You got a
bias.
connection.
Yes, I know the bias, and so I think that's the secret is how I connect with them. Because, for instance, I may talk about how if you're empathetic, you're better able to name variables in the code. You're better able to design your architecture in a way that will be supportive to yourself and your coworkers down the line. So I can even give like code samples of like how to write more compassionate code, right? And so if I connect with them on that level, they're like, oh, she's in the in crowd, okay, and then I'll listen to her talk about, you know what I mean? So honestly, some of my favorite feedback from my trainings is where somebody says, I was skeptical going into this, but I see now how valuable it is. Like, I get that like consistently. And I'm like, I actually like that challenge because I don't know, maybe it's my personality type. Like, I don't mind being a little disagreeable. I don't mind like a little bit of, arguing and compassionate arguing, but I don't mind. So I see it as a challenge to try to win over skeptics. And so, I mean, like when I started my company and got more resistance, like that was actually kind of the most exciting time because I was like, I think when you're really on to something, a lot of times you get a lot of pushback, and so when I get pushback, I actually it kind of like fuels me to continue because I'm like, let's have a conversation, right?
They
Because
need me, right? There's something going on here.
there's something going on here. Like, let's have a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Um, so I have been with I mean, I have had many managers that think that they are the boss and they cannot get very, emotional or compassionate, so they need to be the bosses. And what advice would you give, April, to these leadership positions, or these tech leaders that are looking maybe to integrate more compassion into their leadership style?
Yeah, that's a good point because there is that need, right, to be like authoritative and to like be able to call the shots and whatnot. Like I've even had people say that they're like, this compassion stuff is nice, but sometimes you just do have to tell people what to do, right? And so I think again, I think we're part of this. We're in a transition now where we're starting to see the value of different types of leadership and more empathetic and more compassionate leadership. And so I think for those leaders, showing a little bit of your humanity to your reports actually helps them feel more connected to you, and they'll probably be more willing to listen to what you have to say if you're a little bit vulnerable. And there's a fine line there, right? Because you also don't want to like let everything out and just seem super unstable and like whatever, out of control. So I think there's a fine line where you show a little bit of vulnerability to your reports and show a little bit of your human side. You might say, oh, I'm a little bit nervous about this project, but I know we can handle it, right? Versus saying like, you just need to get this done. And so if you're not in touch with your emotions, so I think something leaders can do, whether it's journaling, whether it's talking it over with somebody, but kind of getting in touch with your own emotions. Because like you're saying, they're like, oh, I just need to be the boss. But the problem is we're all emotional. Like, even if we don't understand it, we are. And so when you feel that like tightness in your chest, when you feel yourself getting like heated in the face, when you feel like nauseous, when you feel your muscles tense up, those are signs of emotion. And we just may not recognize them, but you're never being just purely rational, quote unquote, because you're like a messy human with like these emotions running through you. And so I think when leaders can get in touch with their emotions, that's like step one. And then it's, yeah, connecting with their people. And then three, it's like when you're able to understand your own emotions and see emotions in other people, your reports, your coworkers, whatever it may be, your customers even, I think you realize the value of noticing those emotions and responding to them. So if you're able to notice that your report is stressed and then do something compassionate to help alleviate that, they're going to be more productive, right? So like if we really are looking at productivity as like the main goal here, which again I challenge that, but I know that that's kind of where we're at, in as a industry, then being more compassionate makes your people more productive. And so I think any way that you're able to see that they're a human being too, and so maybe they have a sick parent at home or a sick child, or who knows what's, especially with the pandemic and everything we've been through. I mean, layoffs going on, it's just like the world is like always full of like pain, and it's full of joy too, but there is a lot of pain. And I think when you open your heart to that, and I know that sounds kind of soft, but whatever, that's compassion. uh when you're able to do that, you're able to connect as humans, and that makes people so motivated, like because they're like, oh yeah, I want to, this person cares about me, and so I want to do a good job. And again, if you're, this can be manipulative, so there's a fine line there too. You don't want to manipulate people, but I mean in terms of just empowering people, I think
Mhm.
has pays such dividends that, like, how could you not do it?
Yeah, yeah, of course, totally. Thank you for sharing. Um, April, how has writing contributed to your mission with compassionate coding? I see that you have a newsletter and you collaborate and stuff. Is this a good weapon? Not weapon, it might not be the word, but is this helping you with delivering your message?
Yeah, it's been a really helpful tool. Yeah, so writing, I've always liked writing. I've always like kept a diary or journal, and in school, like even though I was studying computer science, I was at a liberal arts school, so I took classes and I would have professors that say, April, like never stop writing. So writing's always been something that I value. And it has been very powerful in terms of getting my message out. So, when I started Compassionate Coding in 2016, I had worked at a lot of companies, but I didn't have like, it's not that I had been like a Google employee or an Uber employee or Amazon or any of those. Like, so I didn't have like a big brand name behind me. And like even my college, Pomona College, it's a very good school, but it's not like it doesn't have like a Stanford brand name kind of thing. And so I had to kind of figure stuff out on my own and try to attract an audience on my own. And so that started with blogging. So put out content about things that were bothering me, things I wanted to improve in the industry. I put out blog posts. Twitter was a big tool for me. Now it's kind of a weird place with the now X with Elon Musk taking over. But back in the day,
Mhm.
Twitter was kind of that's like where I would share my thoughts. And at first it was just like some of my frustrations, to be honest, like our little snarky comments on tech culture and blah, blah, blah. Now I'm, a little bit I've matured a bit, but like I think it resonated with people. And so I'd see, some of my tweets went viral, and so all that kind of stuff. And then people read my newsletter, or sorry, read my blog post. I had a blog post, "Confessions of a Recovering Jerk Programmer," that got a lot of views because that was where I talked about how I used to feel pressure to be one of those jerk programmers, quote unquote,
Mhm.
and how I had my own awakening. And so that was huge. The newsletter, I actually restarted that in the last year, and it's because social media is kind of wild now. Like I'm always curious to hear. I'd be curious to hear your perspective as a content creator, especially because you have this nice YouTube channel and everything. But I've been struggling with where even to connect with people because, like I said, Twitter used to be the place. Now there's like Mastodon and Blue Sky and Threads and some people use LinkedIn, but LinkedIn, I feel like the only people I'm really connected with there are people who like I've worked with or met in person. It's much harder to kind of have a big reach there. I mean, I know some people are able to do it, but I don't know, it's been eluding me. Anyway, so I started my newsletter because I realized these are the people who I can most help, and like so I want to stay connected with them because they like compassionate coding. I want to provide value to them. I want to keep helping them, and to be honest, I don't want them to have to use social media to stay in touch. So that's part of my newsletter is I get to share like what's on my mind. I get to hopefully inspire people. Some people respond to my newsletter and they say, "This is exactly what I needed to hear today." And so like that's like, oh, like that's always great to hear, and that keeps me going because like this can be stressful to do this kind of work and everything. And the pandemic was super hard because of like I said, I prefer in person stuff. There were no conferences in person, which is a big part of where I connect with people. So, I mean, it was a very lonely time for me, the pandemic. And so I think writing has helped me stay connected. Writing and publishing it has helped me stay connected, both with myself and with the community. So it's interesting that you called that out because I do think writing is a really powerful tool.
Awesome. Yeah, I was asking because I'm planning to open a newsletter also, and I think your audience and my audience has a lot of similar interests, right? So maybe we can collaborate later on that
Yeah.
offline.
Yeah.
Okay. April, what role does feedback for agilists? Feedback is super important, right? What can you tell me about feedback in this compassion coding theory or practice?
Sure. So I think, with feedback, it is very useful. There's that cliche that feedback is a gift, and it can be if it's delivered well. I think a little too often in tech, I've noticed there's a lot of times we think our feedback is just rational. So we'll just be like, this is just the wrong way to do that. Or, this is just, I'm right and you're wrong, kind of this black and white thinking, when really it always boils down to something more subjective. It's more about values and like what people value and then trade-offs and kind of things, which I know we do discuss trade-offs sometimes, but I think it comes into play in feedback, right? So like if somebody tells me like they just don't like the sound of my voice, for instance, or something like that, it's like,
Hmm.
okay, well, what am I supposed to do with that? You know what I mean? It's like, and so sometimes feedback like that, it's like, okay, thanks for sharing. And you know what I mean? There's like, but if they say, you know, when you speak quickly, it's too quickly, it's hard for me to understand. So if you could slow down, then I would be able to understand you better. Then I'm like, oh, okay. Like there's a reason they value like being being able to understand what I have to say. And for them, this is a challenge if I speak too quickly. Then I have a motivation to think if I care about them and I want to connect with them, then I can slow down how quickly I speak so that they're better able to understand. And so I think when it comes into compassion, it's about conveying when you're giving feedback, it's about conveying what the actual need is underneath versus like the surface level and versus to like judging the other person. So making it much more about like here's what is happening, here's the impact on me, here's what I need in this situation, and so would you try XYZ? And so that's a little rough overview of the framework that we try to use in the training. And I find that helps a lot because then you're not accusing people of things and whatnot. And then also when you're receiving feedback, it's useful to try to understand what the person really needs. Like what's the underlying why? Like like the 5 whys or whatever. You can kind of do that a bit when you get feedback. It's like, wait, why are they saying this really? And then if you get a little deeper, sometimes that's how you can find common ground. And so like for instance, some people, like if a product manager wants you to work on the new dashboard and you're like, no, we need to refactor the code because it's like it's really messy and we need to upgrade the system or whatever. And it's like in that situation, the product manager values maybe getting the dashboard to customers. They value pleasing the customer. They value delivering value. And then if you are the engineer, you value like the future maintainability of the code. You value how quickly you're able to add new features because if you refactor, maybe you'll be able to, or upgrade whatever it is, you'll be able to more quickly add new features. But what do you both value? And what you both value is getting value to the customer, is delivering value to the customer. You both value pleasing the customer, etc. You may also both value collaborating. So you value working together as a team. So when you're giving feedback, if you get to the heart of the matter, like really get to the values, then that's a better way, I think, of giving and receiving feedback.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for sharing. April, how do you ensure continuous improvement, which is another agile principle, as a key principle? How do you ensure continuous improvement in the trainings that you give about emotional intelligence?
Yeah, another great question. Now you're it's like this is clearly not your first time. You know what you're doing here with these questions. I love it. Um,
Thank you.
so I think with I mentioned the action plan that we do at the end, and so I think a big part of that is I encourage people to do, like I said, the ongoing retrospectives. And that's a way to facilitate the continuous improvement because we look at what are we doing well and then what can we do better and then what steps can we take to make that continuous improvement. And so sometimes it comes down to I need to take this training and then a different training or read a different book and whatnot. So I always include resources at the end too for people to like, here's interesting books you might read or other courses you might take or podcasts you might listen to, whatever it may be. And so I think that like having that commitment. And so I think where compassion comes into play is self-compassion because I think one reason we have such, issues with burnout and whatnot in tech is we're so hard on ourselves and we think, we're never good enough and we're never, all of this. And I think and we overcompensate by trying to act super confident and arrogant and whatnot. But underneath, we're afraid, like we have imposter syndrome, or we're worried about being found out and whatnot. And so I think a big part of this is self compassion for like, and a growth mindset, right? So understanding that it's okay wherever you are now. Like if you're not a compassionate person, fine. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was a jerk programmer, whatever. We are where we are. Like accept yourself as you are and then figure out like what steps you can take to make improvements. What do you need to learn? What might different perspectives you might read. I think a great thing to do for anyone is to read viewpoints of people we disagree with. So, we talked a little bit earlier about you get hate on videos or whatever. And it's like, I think too often that's because people think in this narrow way, like it's my way, or then that's the only way. And I think looking at the other side of whatever issue and whether it's like a technical thing in terms of what language or framework to use or what, process to use or tool, or whether it's personal things or political things or social issues, whatever it is, looking at both sides and then kind of figuring out like like where's the common ground here. So I think that that's a good way to improve on these skills because compassion is about understanding someone else's experience in life. And so I think if you
Mhm.
expose yourself to their experience and different experiences, that's a great way too. So those are a few thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice. Um, at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned that Agile was kind of helpful, but it left behind some key aspects of emotional intelligence, right? So the question would be, what are we missing, right? So what do you suggest for persons like me, agile coaches, scrum masters, persons that are taking kind of a leadership role, or not even leadership? It could be anyone in the company that is trying agile methodologies and is doing scrum or whatever. What are we missing? How can we make those better in the terms of emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah, so it may help to give some examples. So I remember I was working at a company and they were doing, quote unquote, agile, and they actually we were working with a consultancy to kind of help facilitate that. So we had some contractors from them kind of within the company, and then we had full time people that were also trying to pick up these skills. And I remember in particular, one of our product managers was really upset because the agile guy, like one of the agile contractors, uh, was like being really just like pedantic about a certain meeting and the way it needed to be run, and like technically he was trying to preserve the agile aspects of it, like no, we don't do that in this meeting, we do that in, whatever. But he was missing out on the human side of like, sometimes you need to bend the rules and sometimes you need to care more about connecting with the human. So that's like one example. I was in a lean coffee one time online, or I think it's lean coffee, where people it's like sort of a it's some of the people in agile do it, but it's basically where you have a conversation, but it's a little bit facilitated. So you like vote thumbs up or thumbs down if you want to continue the topic or if you want to change topics after a certain amount of time. So it's kind of a casual chat, but also there's a little bit of a structure to it. And I remember like somebody was sharing this really emotional story, and then, oh, but we hit the 2 minute mark. So it was time to vote up or down. And I was like, okay, let the person finish. Like, geez, like, I mean, I get it. But so I think those are like little micro examples, but they speak to something bigger, which is sometimes we're so like, this is the process, this is what we need to do. And no, we don't talk about that. That's for this or that's, and there's a fine line to strike there. But I think a lot of times agile will get very like, fixated and kind of, which again, look at the name agile, clearly that's not the way, right? And so I think sometimes we need to zoom out a bit and be like, okay, like, yes, we're working roughly towards this, but we need to be able to kind of respond on the spot and remember that these are humans we're dealing with. And if somebody's like, in the middle of like crying or something like that on a call, like, you don't need to be like, oh, we hit our 2 minutes, all right, goodbye. Like, there's a fine line there. So I think those are like some examples.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think that's because sometimes we have Scrum Masters or Agilists that are very new to start at my first job or my second job. So I will try to make sure that the Scrum guide is implemented exactly the way it is, right, or Kanban or whatever. But yeah, as we get older, we understand that we're humans, and it's a guide. So just bear with me in implementing it. So yeah, but I agree. April, could you, and this is a good message for everyone, Scrum Masters and coaches looking at us, just, be flexible, understand the human side, right? Um, could you describe a case where you went in a company with a customer and they then provided the training, and then you saw a big win, like some good feedback, or some good changes in the company, or like a success story?
Yeah, so I think, I alluded to it a bit earlier, but like I get these messages where people like a year after I was there, and so like, in some cases you may have even forgotten whatever training you had, right? But I'll hear
Mhm.
back and they'll be telling me like, oh yeah, we've been trying to apply this, technique and it helped in this way, or when they'll give me like a little taste of like what they went through, or like it totally changed how they view things. Like, so I think it gives teams a shared vocabulary that they can use. And also what people have commented on is that like I'm able to call out issues without worrying about the politics of the company because I'm an outsider. So like
Mhm.
I don't really care like if I upset people or whatever. I mean, within reason. But I mean, I don't care if people like, I don't have to maintain my reputation within the company because I'm coming in and I can like point out issues. And so I think that like that's been something that comes in a lot that really makes a difference to me. And then of course I can see it with like repeat customers. So like with one particular company I'm thinking of, I did a training with them for their leadership team first, because sometimes it helps to get the leaders on board first. And then they're like, oh, we want this for, everybody. Can you come in again? And so whenever that happens, that's always good because then it's, yeah. And so like I remember at a certain large social media company, I was doing a training, and I will remain nameless. And we were doing the feedback exercise, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, like everyone in this company needs this training." You know what I mean? And so I think, and then they were like, "We're trying to, apply this like going forward." And like the customer that was like, "I've been struggling with this issue for years, and you helped me work through it." And I was like, "Oh, like those are things that I'm like, okay, like there's something there, and even messages that I get like from blog posts, like we talked about writing. I was revisiting some for in preparation for something, and one was just like, "This is like the best thing to happen to software engineering, like in years." And I'm like, "Oh, like that's really nice." So I think, and again, it's not all me. Like I mean, the company is, but I mean, in terms of, I think people are. This is a message that's resonating with people, and they're applying it in their daily lives, and they're applying it on their teams, and it's a slow, gradual process. You know what I mean? And so. Uh, those little messages keep me going, and like seeing the impact that has. And of course there's like stats showing that companies, I don't know, it's like millions or billions of dollars or whatever per year to unproductive conflict. So like anytime you're improving those skills and not having like having more productive conflict, because again, conflict is inevitable, but doing it in a more productive way, I think you see dividends. So yeah, so I think I get the most value from those long-term relationships with companies and individuals who like, especially, so I've done a lot of work at video game companies, and
Mhm.
so, people will, like, move from one company to another, and then they'll tell them about the training, and so then I'll get
Mm.
to do it there. And so I think that also is kind of like, okay, clearly they found value in it because they feel so a lot of my work has been word of mouth, I will say. So that's why I like my website's, like, not super fancy or whatever, because 'cause I'm just like, it's mostly word of mouth, so whatever." I don't have to, like, maintain it too much. I do a little bit, but it's not where you when you're doing, like, this kind of thing, you have to keep it lean as well. So I only have so many hours in a day, and so conversations like this, speaking with customers, speaking with students sometimes, because I do that as well. All of that to me is like a great use of time, and so that's what I've prioritized as well.
Thank you for that. I agree with you, and yeah, I also value this, and the feedback from the customers. That's the best part, right? I think. Um, April, I think that one important topic regarding emotional intelligence and provoking changes in companies, in the culture of companies, is motivation, right? I have read many things about motivation. Some persons or experts think that motivation can only come from from your own self, or from the inside, from the persons. And then there's others that say that there's a way to motivate others, right? What do you think about the motivational I don't know, topic or techniques, or what do you think about motivation, right?
Yeah, I think that intrinsic motivation that comes from within, I do think that
Hmm.
that's like, I've read that too. That's like, that's really powerful, is when you're motivated intrinsically. But that said, I think that something leaders can do is to help people, at least help guide people to get in touch with that intrinsic motivation, right? Or to
Hmm.
find out what it is intrinsically. So you can still have external help, I think, but what that help is really about is connecting with internally what you care about. And again, I'm I keep coming back to this, but the core values are really important here. So like what you're motivated by is usually like what you value the most, right? So sometimes, like even on a software team, somebody who's often seen as kind of like the jerk on the team, or like kind of like he's a little bit like, and I say he, but it could be a she, but a lot of times it's he. Let's just be real here. He is like kind of like a little bit aggressive and a little bit rough around the edges. They're not a bad person. This person just really cares about maybe code quality, or they care about like the technology and like that kind of thing. And they just want to write really good code. They want to create a really solid product. And so anything that gets in the way of that, they just like get really angry, and they whatever. And so, but when you connect with their core values and you realize that, you're like, oh, they just really value this. You kind of understand them better, and then they'll be less frustrated because they'll realize that you understand what's motivating them, and they're more motivated by being able to like write code and just enjoy themselves. They don't want to have to deal with putting out fires or whatever it may be that's stressing them out. And so once you understand that as a leader or even as a coworker, you can better connect with that, and then that individual won't be as difficult, you know what I mean? Because you'll realize like, oh, they're just motivated by different things than what I'm motivated by. And so yeah, I think that's really important. And I do think, a lot of times I've seen on Twitter lately, and but probably always, but especially lately, a few have stood out to me where people are talking about how to like maximize your income in tech and how to like make more money and all these things. And which again, not going to knock it. Clearly there's value to that. People need to eat, people need to provide for their family. But I do think, to your point, that when you're only motivated by like external things, I think that there's a limit to how much that's really going to motivate you, because when you're connected with something deeper, something internal, like whatever it may be, your deeper core values, I think that that's more likely to lead you to a meaningful life and a meaningful career than only trying to chase external markers of success that everyone's told you need to care about, but that you might not actually care about. So that's like another thought on motivation.
Ah, sorry. Yeah, your answer totally makes sense with a short story that I just read that makes a lot of sense here. I'm gonna tell you about it. So there was this teacher in a classroom, and the guy always had two or three persons that were talking all the time, shouting at the very end of the room, at the bottom. And what he did, he found this very nice coach by sofa or whatever, and he brought it to the classroom and he put it in the front rows. And then he said, whoever gets for and these three guys that were always talking, and they were not paying attention, they were also late every time to the classroom. So he put over there the coach, and then he said, the first persons that come to the classroom will be able to sit over here very comfortable, right? So these three guys were always on time after that, because they wanted to be really comfortable, and they were paying attention because they were in front road, in front seat. So I think that what you mentioned about, as managers, we need to set up the environment and the tools so someone feels motivated to improve, right? So that makes sense, a lot of sense with the story, right? So I totally agree with you. We need to set up the environment so they make that step, right?
That's a
Cool.
great story. Well said. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so last question. I think we talked really fast. Both of us. I think that's good. Um, April, if you had the power, or I will tell you, April, we're going to put this big message. I don't know how to say it in English. I like spectacular, like big sign in the
Mhm.
streets, and you get like 5,000 of these across the planet. What message would you put over there? This is a hard one.
It's a very hard one. Yeah, you didn't even give me a heads up on that one. So I was just
Sorry.
figuring out here. No, it's okay. Um, this is like it's maybe cliche, but I'm gonna go with it anyway. But like, I think something about love. Like maybe love more, or you know what I mean? Because like I think that that's what we need, and that's what, like, we all need. We need to love ourselves more, and I mean, we need to care for ourselves more. I mean, I use compassion because I think that there's a lot of research behind it and everything, and I think it's a really powerful tool, but compassion's a form of love, you know what I mean? It's a form of expressing love. It's an aspect of it, and I think right now there's so much, like, pain and suffering in the world, and, there's you know, on every level, like on a personal level, on like a societal level, on a planet level, global level. And there's so much division and there's so much arguing and there's just so much like of this negativity. And I think we're right. We need this like raising of consciousness. We need this like raising of like different ways of looking at the world that take into account people around us and not just being self-interested. And so, inspiring people to love more in whatever way. And so, um, that's I think, because that's a good start. I think so. Yeah.
That's a very nice message, right? Like, put more love in the planet, right? For
Yeah.
yourself and for others, right? That's what yeah, I agree. We need it. Okay, April, do you have any plans that you want to share with the audience? Like, I don't know, any coming webinars, or do you want to invite them to your newsletter? Or we will leave in the comments all the links to your social networks, to your website, everything, right? But do you want to invite them into something?
Sure. So I will say I do have some upcoming like in-person talks coming up. So in April, I'll be in Chicago to speak at a PHP conference. In May, I will be in Sweden to speak at a conference kind of for consultants and engineers and all types of people. It's just a general tech conference. And then in July, I'll be in Toronto, Canada to speak at a C++ conference. So yeah, I'm all over the place here.
Nice.
And yeah, and my newsletter, though, is at compassionatecoding.com, and there's a sign up link there. And it's just, it's a free newsletter. It's every 2 weeks or so, but I'm a human, so sometimes it's a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, whatever. Keep it human there. But yeah, it's like thoughts, and I try to share like links from compassionate things around the web too. So I'm always reading stuff, and sometimes I'll share like videos and stuff that other people might find, or new research, because again, there is a lot of cutting edge research coming out around how compassion and how emotions and culture and all these issues affect productivity, and so a lot of that's useful and interesting to people. So that kind of stuff. Um, and I have this newsletter, so that's where I will be announcing. I'm also working on some online course stuff so that more I can reach more people, because a lot of what I do is either in person or virtual Zoom workshops that are live with teams. But a lot of people have reached out saying they would like a individual course on this, and so I'm trying to, give the people what they want. So I'm working on that, so people can stay tuned for that as well.
Awesome. Well, we will put links over there to everything you mentioned. And April, I have been doing this for 4 years, and this is one of my favorite sessions. Thank you for that. They
Thank
really appreciate, and I
you.
don't say that to anyone, right?
Aw.
So thank you for being here, for your time, and let's connect again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Hector.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.